They thought ripping her teeth out would make her talk. But when they pried the sixth molar from her bloodied mouth and saw the blinking light nestled in its hollow core, they didn't just stop. They panicked. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The girl lying strapped to the steel table wasn't some anonymous prisoner. She was something else entirely, and the room full of interrogators suddenly understood they'd been the ones exposed all along. For 3 hours, they'd worked on her with cold instruments and colder eyes, expecting tears, begging, surrender. What they got instead was silence so measured it unsettled even the most veteran among them. Her name, or at least, the one etched on the fake ID they'd pulled off her, was Lena Kasperi. 19, Swiss national. Student of urban archaeology. Arrested near the restricted border zone of the Austro-Kazakh conflict region after allegedly breaching a satellite monitoring station. The report was mundane, the girl, less so. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She hadn't screamed, not once, not even when the dental forceps cracked her bicuspid and the nerve endings twitched in her jaw. Her head had rolled slightly, yes, her eyes had blinked more often, a natural pain response, they told themselves. But what no one expected was that in the fragments of her molar, they'd find cold metal and miniature circuitry glinting beneath the blood. Is this some kind of implant? One of the interrogators asked, his voice teetering between confusion and fear. The room fell quiet. One technician leaned in with a sterilized probe, nudging the object. It responded, a slow blue pulse, then a static click. The same sound their comm system made when it was hijacked. No one spoke. Then the overhead lights flickered, just once, and a panel in the far corner hissed as power rerouted. She was still conscious, bruised, restrained, blood pooled beneath her, but conscious, and smiling. You don't understand, Lena whispered, voice rough like sandpaper against steel. You've just activated the trace. It was no longer about interrogation. It was no longer about finding out who she worked for. It was now about how much she knew, what she'd already uploaded, and who was listening. Because someone somewhere had just received a signal from a tooth, the man in charge, Commander Orlov, barked orders, shut it down, kill the power, find the source, but it was too late. The molar transmitter had already done its job. The feed had gone live the moment they broke it. Upstairs, 6 stories above their subterranean compound, a silent drone drifted into the airspace. It didn't carry weapons, just lenses. Lena had always planned it this way. From the moment she entered the conflict zone, she knew capture was inevitable. It had to be. Because if they didn't catch her, they wouldn't dig deep enough, wouldn't be tempted to go too far. She needed them to see what was inside her, needed to show the world the price of torture, of unregulated war, of disappearing civilians under the guise of national security. And she had prepared for that moment in the only way she could, by becoming the message herself. Each molar had been custom engineered by a team that didn't officially exist, Obsidian Index, a Black Ops neural intelligence division believed to have disbanded after the Geneva leaks. The transmitters didn't just send location data, they streamed biometric stress indicators, audio, video, real-time sensory mapping. The pain they inflicted on her, it had already been broadcast to nodes across 6 countries. It was archived, multiplied, immortalized, and now their facility, hidden beneath the unmarked cliffs near Samareki, had a signature, a name, a face. You fools, whispered Orlov's second-in-command, watching the tooth fragment flicker with soft pulses. She wanted us to do this. Outside, the wind howled against the barren land. Inside, Lena closed her eyes, breathing in the sterile scent of antiseptics and electricity. Pain wasn't the enemy. Pain was proof. For most, breaking meant the end. For Lena, it was the broadcast. The transmission didn't go to one place. It fragmented, like shattered glass across the world's black market mirrors, bouncing from dark satellites to ghost servers nestled deep in untraceable networks. At first, it was just static and code. Then came the pulse of her heart, the tremor in her bones, the sound of rusted metal brushing over gloves, and the hiss of steel tools slicing through enamel. At 4:12 GMT, the packet reached Echelon 4, a listening node hidden beneath the glacial core of Svalbard, Norway. There, a woman named Commander Nila Varn, not seen publicly since the Langley cleansing trials, opened her eyes and whispered a phrase she hadn't said in 7 years. Obsidian Index is live. She was alone in the control room, seated between towers of frozen data racks. Her fingers tapped out an encrypted sequence faster than any AI could keep up with, unlocking a secure stream that hadn't been touched since the last operative died mid-sentence. On screen, the video flickered to life, Lena's bloodied face, her jaw trembling, the bruises spreading like storms beneath her skin. The girl wasn't just a signal, she was a statement, and Nila knew exactly who she was. Back in the underground facility, Lena lay still. The guards had retreated from the room, leaving her shackled but unmonitored, unsure if touching her again might set off something else. Commander Orlov stood outside the interrogation suite, barking into a secured line, furious that no one could isolate the source of the outgoing data. "What do you mean the signal can't be traced?" he growled. "It came from her tooth, for God's sake." But even his analyst knew that wasn't just a tooth, that was a Trojan horse wrapped in nerve endings. Lena shifted slightly, her tongue pressed against another molar, not the one they'd taken, the one adjacent. It clicked once. In the surveillance room upstairs, all monitors went black for 2 seconds. When they flickered back on, every screen showed the same image, a rotating symbol, obsidian black against white, the kind only the deepest intelligence archives would recognize. 3 jagged triangles forming a ring, with a single red eye in the center. Orlov stared. He didn't recognize it, but his assistant did. "That's the insignia of a disavowed group," she said, her voice suddenly tight. "They used to infiltrate intelligence ecosystems through BioWare, human data couriers. But that was 10 years. The program was buried. Everyone involved, eliminated." Orlov turned pale. Outside the walls of their compound, movement had begun. Echelon 4 had already issued a silent activation order to 6 embedded assets across Central Asia. The girl hadn't come alone, she was the first domino. Each of her teeth carried different subnets. The molar they ripped out was only the public reveal, the alarm bell, but others, if triggered, would do far worse. Open archives, release names, expose field operatives, decrypt surveillance audio of black site executions. She had become a living insurance policy, a bomb no one could defuse without setting off 5 more. Nila Varn watched the footage in Svalbard, recognizing the restraint in Lena's movements, the deliberate nature of her agony. This wasn't improvisation, this was ritual, rehearsed to perfection. Nila opened a second encrypted line. A man in Lagos answered, former Obsidian logistics chief, presumed dead after the Canary Archives collapse. "She's in play," Nila said. "Initiate phase 2. Lena's head turned slightly, and even through the haze of sedation, she smiled again. She felt it. Somewhere in the distance, allies were waking up. The surveillance room's power failed completely. In the dark, one technician whispered, "What have we brought into this place?" Commander Orlov's hands trembled, not from guilt, but from the growing realization that this girl, silent, fractured, and defiant, wasn't just there to be interrogated. She was there to burn the entire system from the inside, and her teeth were just the fuse. 7 years before Lena Kaspari ever set foot in the Austro-Kazakh buffer zone, before she was even called Lena, the blueprints for her body were drafted by a secretive cabal known only to a dozen living individuals. They were called the Architects, remnants of a disbanded neural warfare initiative, buried under hundreds of gag orders, surviving only in redacted budget lines and corrupted archives. Their mission had never been to win wars, it had been to win minds, to create operatives who could carry data, weaponized information, living evidence that couldn't be erased, scrubbed, or discredited. Biological vessels that couldn't be hacked without consequence. The girl they selected had no birth certificate, no surviving family, no fingerprints on any civilian database. At age 9, she spoke 7 dialects. At age 11, she bit a diplomat's ear off during a staged kidnapping exercise, and smiled with blood dripping down her chin. She wasn't built to obey, she was built to remember. Her teeth were among the final upgrades. Each molar was retrofitted over 3 years by a rogue biotech surgeon from the Hellskirk trials, using a combination of memory polymer shielding and nano-mesh signal amplifiers. On the surface they looked like natural dental implants, but embedded inside was a layered communication array, short-burst encrypted signal cores, microscopic thermal switches, and audio frequency converters. They couldn't be detected by X-ray or magnetic sweeps. Only one way existed to find them. You had to pull them out, but by then, it would be too late. Back in the black site, Commander Orlov stormed through the lower corridors, as armed personnel began evacuating the surveillance hub. Whatever fail-safe Lena had triggered was interfering with their entire internal system. Security doors, ventilation controls, comm relays, all responding as if someone had rewired the command hierarchy. Lena didn't resist her restraints. She didn't need to. Every second that passed allowed the internal network to unravel. The architect who trained her had once said, "If they're still looking for a password, you've already won." Somewhere on the other side of the world, Commander Neela Varn and her silent counterpart in Lagos were reassembling the long-buried intelligence chain. They pulled operatives out of hiding, reactivated sleeper codes, and wiped 3 intelligence contractors off the global map without firing a single bullet. The world had forgotten the architects, but the architects had not forgotten the world. Inside the interrogation chamber, Lena pressed her tongue against her lower right molar, a silent click. In the hallway outside, Orlov's assistant collapsed, clutching her head, as her earpiece shrieked with ultrasonic feedback. Moments later, all facility radios went dead. The lights didn't flicker this time, they just stayed off. Orlov stared into the growing dark, realization dawning. This wasn't a girl with secrets, this was a signal tower, in human skin. The analysts who had monitored her arrest logs now understood why she let herself be caught. She hadn't made a mistake. She had delivered herself. And now the world's most secure off-grid detention facility, a location not found on any digital or analog map, was being mapped in real time by networks that weren't supposed to exist anymore. The kind of networks that once made empires fall, the kind of networks that turned war crimes into court cases, and all of it was being routed through a 19-year-old girl's mouth. Lena blinked slowly, eyes adjusting to the dark. She had one more molar ready, one that didn't broadcast. It detonated, not in fire, but in revelation. Elsewhere, servers unlocked, videos uploaded. Real-time footage from hidden chambers across the facility played simultaneously across 50 secure feeds worldwide. The world would see what they did here, and who they did it to. Lena had been a ghost, now she was a mirror. She didn't come to escape, she came so none of them could. The first official death didn't come from gunfire, it came from a man named Dr. Rami Curry, the lead system architect for the Black Site's internal communications grid, the only one who understood how deep Lena's breach had gone. He locked himself in sublevel 3's server chamber, after watching the video feed from her molar, flash an encryption code he hadn't seen since his years at Project Veil Point. A codename buried so deep in pre-Obsidian intelligence that even he had assumed it was urban legend. Inside that server room, as cooling fans spun and red lights bathed his sweating face, Rami realized something. The systems weren't just failing, they were being restructured. Root protocols were being rewritten in real time, not by an external hacker, not by code he recognized, but by a living relay, Lena herself. She wasn't just transmitting, she was overriding. By the time Orlov reached him, Dr. Curry had removed his headset and slumped against the cold wall, a syringe in his lap. Cyanide, government issued, fast. His final words, scrawled on the touchscreen. She's not a threat, she's a new protocol. Orlov read it with disbelief. Outside, the compound's exterior gates malfunctioned one by one, sliding open without command. It was still dark, the power grid silent, backup systems looping endlessly through useless self-diagnostics. But now wind moved through the underground halls, where no wind should ever exist, because someone had unlocked external access. In a secure war room, hundreds of kilometers away, Neela Varn watched every moment unfold through a real-time interface, fed directly from Lena's still active molars. She saw the suicide. She saw the breached gates. She saw Orlov panicking, scrambling for manual overrides. She did not smile, but her breath caught, because this, all of this, was only Phase 2. Phase 3 would be exfiltration, not of Lena, but of truth, and it had already begun. Elsewhere, under cover of night, two figures in cloaked thermal suits rappelled down an unmarked cliff face near the compound. They weren't there to rescue Lena, they were there to witness her. Each wore a contact lens embedded with a recording mesh directly linked to a live satellite. They didn't speak, didn't need to. One of them, a woman named Kayla Mirov, had helped develop the first wave of Obsidian Index signal routing back when it was still myth and whispers. Now she was seeing its evolution. Lena Kaspari, the vessel they'd never approved, never certified, never tested, had surpassed every expectation. But even she hadn't expected what would happen next. Inside the black site, the remaining command staff received a final message across all screens. It appeared in stark white on a black background. No signature, no encryption, just 5 words. You cannot erase a mirror. Then the facility's database began to purge itself, not through deletion, through broadcast. Every file, every log, every recording, rewritten in real time, converted into untraceable packets, and bounced through Lena's molars, into a web of dark nodes around the globe. She wasn't just relaying what happened now, she was telling the world everything that had ever happened there. Files on other prisoners, executions, clandestine experiments, disappearances blamed on war zones. They were all being siphoned through a human vessel, and Orlov knew they could no longer kill her without exposing themselves even more. Killing her wouldn't stop the flow, because Lena's final implants had already passed the torch. She was no longer the only transmitter, she was the source code, and somewhere out there, someone else had already begun to receive. Lena wasn't supposed to survive this long. Every simulation Obsidian Index had run showed a maximum viable endurance of 72 hours under enhanced interrogation. She had lasted over 90, and not just physically. She had adapted. By the time Orlov's team tried initiating physical shutdown procedures, it was already too late. Her vital signs were fluctuating in a strange rhythm, not consistent with stress, not with trauma. It was sequencing. Her body was syncing with a second relay system, one that didn't just transmit outward, but also replicated. The command team called it nonsense at first, a trauma-induced hallucination. But when one of the guards removed the remaining fragment of the 6th molar from the lab table and placed it in containment, they noticed something impossible. A new signal began to broadcast from the shard itself. The tooth fragment was still alive. Because Lena's teeth weren't just transmitters, they were echo cores. Every piece that broke off, every sliver taken from her, became its own node in a vast, decentralized intelligence chain. She had become self-replicating memory, living, bleeding, encrypted proof, and the world had started to listen. News leaks began in obscure forums, then came the international war crime watchdog groups. By the time the major networks picked it up, with footage showing the inside of black site chambers, surgical tools, soundproof torture cells, it was too late to deny anything. No official could explain how the footage had surfaced. No journalist could trace the source. Every file had metadata signatures that pointed back to a single impossibility. Molar 7, lower left quadrant, subject L. Kaspari. Across the compound, Orlov convened what remained of his chain of command. Panic had begun to fester beneath their stoicism. The system had been built to erase threats like Lena. Now it was erasing itself. No more extraction, he growled. We don't pull teeth, we pull the plug. Orders were given for lethal termination, but when the medical team returned to Lena's chamber, she was gone. Not escaped, not yet, but moved. The surveillance system showed no footage of the transfer, no breach alerts had triggered. But somehow, she had passed through 3 secured chambers, leaving behind only bloodied footprints and one strange detail. Every room she had entered now had no sound.
The audio logs were blank, white noise, just like her molars emitted before a data burst. Kayla Mirov, observing from the cliffs with her team, whispered to her companion, "She's overriding physical space now. Sound cancellation. She's folding rooms into the signal." He didn't understand, but he didn't question her. Because Kayla had spent 5 years trying to do the very thing Lena was now doing instinctively. Lena wasn't just walking out of the facility, she was rewriting it. Every step she took eroded the operational memory of the black site. Every breath she took echoed through a new node, broadcasting new evidence, new faces, new crimes. By the time Orlov realized it, it was too late to track her. Because there were now 8 confirmed transmissions coming from 8 different locations, and none of them were near Lena anymore. Her teeth had seeded the world. The echo teeth, that was what Neela Varn called them in her private log. Mouthfuls of memory, each capable of bringing down regimes, if activated. Each one a slow-burning match inside the structure of a lie. And Lena, she was no longer the girl in the chair. She was the girl in every signal, in every screen, in every molar dropped in the right place, at the right time, to remind the world that silence was no longer safe.
Deep inside a mountainside control hub in Estonia, a group of NATO cyberforensic analysts stared at something they couldn't explain, audio files arriving in fragments from 8 distinct sources, each layered in subharmonic frequencies that didn't align with any known language. Except they weren't meaningless, they were her voice. Lena Kasperi was speaking, but she wasn't just speaking live, she was reciting things that had never been recorded. Conversations held in sealed rooms, orders issued in whispers, statements made in boardrooms where no devices were allowed. She was leaking secrets she shouldn't possibly know, and yet her voice was consistent across all 8 streams: pitch, breath pattern, vocal signature, all verified. The echo teeth weren't just transmitters, they were receivers. Orlov had ordered the destruction of the remaining fragments. Every sliver of extracted molar was ground down in a biohazard furnace. The containment lab was sterilized. And yet the signals continued, stronger, clearer, because the teeth didn't send secrets. They awakened them. Inside every corrupted government node, sealed military log, every black site audio file, Lena's voice began to emerge, layered into the static like a ghost beneath the noise. Not reading from scripts, remembering. The question now wasn't how she was doing it. It was whose voice would she speak next. Orlov grew quieter by the hour. He stopped barking orders. He stopped eating. Eventually, he ordered all internal comms disabled and locked himself in his quarters, refusing visitors. Because he'd heard the whisper too. At 2:14 local time, his private earpiece, unconnected to any server, played Lena's voice. "You had a daughter once, didn't you? Zoya, age 6, taken in retaliation. You lied on the report, said she died in a blast. She didn't." Orlov dropped the earpiece. His hands trembled. She knew. No file existed that contained those details. Not one. Not even in his mind. He had never replayed the full memory. But the whisper had come, soft, merciless, from inside a tooth that no longer existed. Somewhere inside that girl, behind those eyes, behind the pulp and bone and crimson bruises, lived all their sins, and she was done keeping them. Elsewhere, Neela Varn activated the dormant listening posts in Helsinki and Doha. Each streamed a copy of the same viral signal. It wasn't a video, not a face, just Lena's voice, repeating phrases, some poetic, some clinical, some so specific and damning that senior military officials in 3 countries resigned overnight. "I told you, you cannot erase a mirror." Across protest groups, forums, pirate newsrooms, and independent investigation threads, Lena Kasperi's name began appearing in bold-coded tags. The mouthpiece, echo teeth, molars, of memory, obsidian, lives. Even the deep net had no unified theory. Some said she was a failed AI experiment. Others believed she was a clone, or a psychometric bioweapon designed by the UN to destabilize authoritarian control systems. No one agreed on who made her, but everyone agreed on one thing: Lena Kasperi had become unavoidable. The truth no longer lived in documents or archives. It lived inside a girl who'd had her teeth ripped out, and who bit back harder than the world ever expected. Part 7. The Facility That Forgot Itself. 3 days after Lena disappeared from her holding cell, the black site's internal map no longer made sense. Entire wings that once connected seamlessly now looped back on themselves. Doors opened to empty shafts. Rooms they had never built appeared in the surveillance logs, and then vanished again without a trace. Hallways had shifted. Staircases led nowhere. Even the elevators ceased to recognize the sublevels they were programmed to access. Orlov stood in the operations center, staring at a blueprint he had memorized years ago. Now it looked like a puzzle cut with the wrong edges. What was once a pristine structure of control, steel, concrete, isolation, had become a labyrinth of echoes. "I want a physical sweep of every floor," he ordered. But none of his men returned from level -5, not dead, not wounded. They simply stopped responding. The last audio they received from that floor was one word, whispered through a thick veil of static: "Remember." Meanwhile, Lena's broadcasts continued, but they weren't just exposing crimes anymore. They were dismantling structure, not metaphorically, physically. In Langley, 3 senior analysts assigned to international covert logistics lost access to over a decade of files. Petabytes of memory were wiped, not just from the cloud, but from their backup drives, air-gapped servers, and personal vaults. In Geneva, the encrypted records of the 2032 Siberian internment camps vanished, each file rewritten with a recursive loop of Lena's final transmission, a single molar slowly rotating in black space. And in a university in Kyoto, a theoretical mathematician realized something chilling. The data packets from Lena's molars weren't just acting as files. They were behaving like pathways. Encrypted fractals, echo pulses, physical architecture embedded in code. She wasn't broadcasting memories. She was rebuilding places inside other machines. The compound that held her wasn't simply crumbling under digital sabotage. It was becoming irrelevant, overwritten by her own living imprint. They had made her a relay, but she had evolved into something far more dangerous. A constructive virus, one that turned pain into architecture, trauma into corridors, and silence into recursive sound. The kind that folded environments back onto themselves until no one could tell what was real anymore. Kyla Mirov watched the encrypted feed from her satellite perch, whispering notes into her recorder. "She's converted the black site," she said quietly. "It's not a facility anymore." "What is it then?" her partner asked. Kyla didn't answer for a long time. Then finally, "It's her memory now." Orlov tried to lead a sweep team down through the old barracks, but every door they opened was filled with mirrored panels reflecting Lena's face, each distorted by tooth-shaped fractures in the glass. They slammed them shut, but the reflections lingered in their eyes. Then came the scent, not of blood or death, but of dental antiseptic, sharp and sterile, flooding the air like an unseen gas. The scent of the procedure room, the one they used to make her talk. It had become a sensory trap, stitched into the air itself, looping through every corridor, a kind of artificial PTSD triggered not by memory, but by proximity. One soldier collapsed. Another began crying, unable to stop reliving his own hidden guilt. None of them had been touched, and still they fell. The last camera in sublevel -3 captured a single frame before going dark. Lena standing unchained in the far corridor, bathed in flickering emergency light. Her mouth was closed, her eyes locked on the lens. Then she vanished. She had become the signal. The building was now her witness, and all who stepped inside would carry a fragment of her, a tooth of truth embedded somewhere deep in their minds, a memory they would never be able to pull out. The Minister of Internal Security, Emeric Volin, had seen coups, cyber wars and collapses of entire nations, but what he read in the red folder marked recursive memory event. Class 7 made his fingers twitch uncontrollably. He closed the folder, lit a cigarette with trembling hands, and told the 6 generals seated at the black glass conference table, "This isn't counterintelligence, it's counter-reality." They stared at him blankly. Then one of them, General Sartain, asked, "How can dental transmitters override structural systems?" Volin didn't answer directly. Instead, He pointed to the dossier's final page. A high-resolution scan of one of Lena's extracted molars. Only now, it looked like no molar ever grown in a human mouth. It was a micro-engine, layered with fractal nodes and superconductive filaments, not surgically inserted. Grown. Those weren't implants, Valen said slowly. They were cultivated, engineered inside her by someone who understood neural bioarchitecture better than any of our labs. The silence thickened. Then came the real question. Who built her? That answer hadn't been confirmed. But the folder offered a name, not of a person but a program. Arceus 9. Long believed to be myth. A phantom research branch buried beneath half a dozen front organizations, said to have disappeared after an ethics tribunal condemned its experiments in synthetic cognition through trauma. Their goal had been radical: build a brain that could self-replicate under extreme stress. A brain that didn't break when tortured. It branched, expanded, adapted. It was rumored they tested on child soldiers, refugee orphans, runaways from systems that wouldn't report them missing. Most believed Arceus 9 had burned itself out when an entire lab vanished in a firestorm in Irkutsk. But Lena's body was filled with patterns only Arceus 9 could have seeded. Each transmitter was mapped to a sensory node, each molar encoded with different frequencies, emotional spectrums, situational responses, even moral logic variables. In simpler terms, her teeth weren't storing messages. They were her brain's redundancies, external backups, a decentralized nervous system. So when they ripped them out, they didn't disable her. They triggered her evolution. Sartain looked pale. You're saying we didn't break her? We activated her. No, Valen replied. You didn't activate her. You woke her. Halfway across the Atlantic, on a private vessel veiled under diplomatic silence, Kyla Mirov sat beside Lena in the observation room. Neither spoke. The room was clean, empty. One mirrored wall, one cot, one sealed observation slit. Lena sat cross-legged, eyes closed. Kyla studied the EEG scanner beside her, baffled. There were 3 distinct cognitive rhythms firing in tandem. 3. One reading was calm. The second pulsed erratically. The third was recursive. It fed into itself. Endless thought loops layered with encrypted sequences. Kyla leaned closer to the speaker grill. You know they'll come for you. Lena opened her eyes. They already did. Kyla tried again. You're not just a person anymore. You're a host. I'm a library. Lena corrected softly. Kyla paused. Of what? Lena didn't blink. Of every scream they thought was wasted. That night the sea around the ship began emitting a low pulsing hum. Dozens of deep-sea sonar buoys, from 4 different nations, captured the same subsonic pattern. Not a natural frequency, not animal, it was digital. The signal broadcast from Lena's body had reached open water. It was calling something. Not just people, not armies, but places, ruins, dormant systems built long before anyone alive had realized they were built. Somewhere Arceus 9 had left behind more than just Lena. And now the other libraries were waking up too. Only this time, they weren't in teeth. They were in bones, spines, skulls. And the signal was summoning every piece of her extended body from the dark. It would no longer be enough to silence Lena. They would have to silence the entire architecture of pain she had seeded. But she wasn't hiding anymore. She was transmitting in broad daylight, daring them to listen. There are frequencies you don't hear with your ears. Frequencies that crawl down your spine, that make your teeth itch and your eyes water, that reach into the oldest corners of your nervous system, the ones that evolved when humans still huddled in caves, not cities. That's what the deep-sea signal was. It didn't ask for permission. It triggered awakenings. Across 6 countries, subjects marked psychological type, residual trauma, neurological mutation, unresolved began seizing in their sleep. In Caracas, a homeless boy convulsed on a rooftop and whispered a string of numbers in a dialect never spoken on Earth. In Helsinki, a deaf woman screamed, not with her voice, but through a burst of frequencies from her dental fillings. In Algeria, a prison warden opened a solitary confinement cell to find a woman who hadn't spoken in 13 years staring at the wall and repeating, I am Echo,
I am Echo. I am Echo. Each one had something in common. They were all failed subjects of Arceus 9. But now, they were waking up. Not fully. Not yet. But the librarian was calling. And deep in the Black Sea something answered. A structure long thought to be a Cold War sonar bunker lit up on every NATO frequency. But no man turned it on. It had no staff, no power grid, no declared location. The surveillance satellite that captured it malfunctioned 2 minutes later. Not from heat, but from overload. Inside the floating vessel where Lena sat, the air had changed. Kyla Mirov entered the observation room holding a thermal imaging tablet. Every time Lena exhaled, the air distorted. Not heat waves, not radiation, but binary pulses, forming infrared glyphs in the condensation. Kyla traced the pattern again. Same as yesterday, same as the day before. You're repeating a map, Kyla said quietly. Lena didn't answer. Her eyes remained closed, but her bones had begun vibrating. They weren't shivering. They were transmitting. Kyla zoomed in on Lena's fingers. Under the nail beds, threads of micro-gold woven like vines through the tissue. It had grown since the last scan. That's not metal we inserted, Kyla said. That's not from any device we recovered. Lena opened her eyes. She didn't blink. She whispered, I was never meant to be one person. Kyla's hand froze. What were you meant to be? Lena looked past her. Not at the room, not at the mirror, but at something through the wall. A beginning. Hours later, Kyla convened a secure call with her superior at Greywake. Director Cole appeared with his trademark stillness, leaning forward with that look that said, get to the part that matters. Kyla didn't hesitate. She's not the only one. Her signals are triggering reactive evolution in failed Arceus prototypes. Cole frowned. I thought all the other subjects were terminated or lost. They were. Then what are we looking at? Kyla turned the camera toward Lena's scan. She's reassembling them. Psychically, technologically, biologically. Cole stared for a long time. Then he asked, what's the new protocol? Kyla hesitated, because the truth was she didn't know whose side she was on anymore. She looked at Lena, who sat still, who had never fought back violently, never screamed, never asked why, only adapted, only evolved. Kyla switched off the mic and whispered into the screen, we don't need a new protocol, we need a new definition of human. That night, Lena's heart rate tripled, not in fear, not in stress, but in synchronization. Thousands of heartbeats, all over the world, began to match hers within a 0.02 margin. Unconnected, untracked, unexplainable. The network wasn't digital, it was biological. A chorus of forgotten survivors, whose trauma had coded them into being. And Lena, she was no longer the signal. She was now the server. One woman, one body, but inside her, a billion screams finding structure. And somewhere in a war chamber buried beneath the Arctic shelf, a general stood and said the only words that mattered. She's not trying to escape, she's trying to merge. She didn't sleep, she didn't eat, but she was growing. Not in size, in density. The latest scan showed Lena's skeletal mass had increased by 17%. But it wasn't just calcium deposits. There were new materials forming in her marrow. Non-metallic, non-biological, and definitely not man-made. Dr. Kyla Mirov held the scan in one hand, and a shaking cup of coffee in the other. She's synthesizing compounds we haven't even named, she muttered. The technician monitoring Lena turned pale. You mean she's mutating? Kyla shook her head. Mutation is random. This is precision fabrication. She's building something inside herself. Lena, seated quietly in the glass cell, rotated her wrist slowly. Each joint moved with unnatural grace, not mechanical, not fluid, something in between. Her blood work showed a spike in cortical nanotissue, material that didn't exist 6 weeks ago. Somehow she was becoming a platform. Kyla uploaded the data to Greywake HQ, but before it could finish, a warning flashed. Uplink denied. Server rejected. Local file destruction imminent. Kyla yanked the hard drive. 2 seconds later, her console exploded in a puff of ozone and static. She just blacked out our entire neural net, a voice from engineering radioed in. No, Kyla said. She overrode it. Lena's presence was beginning to affect systems, not just people. Every device within 20 feet of her cage had begun to pulse at the same rhythm. Phones blinked when she inhaled. Leads flickered to the beat of her heartbeat. They weren't tools anymore. They were limbs, extensions. Everything we built to monitor her, Kyla whispered, is becoming hers. Hours later, Lena stood for the first time in 3 days. Her footsteps didn't echo. They absorbed sound. Her shadow didn't stretch naturally. It rippled, like an oil spill of human memories trapped in black liquid. Kyla entered the chamber alone. No guards, just silence. She carried a mirror. Lena had never seen her own reflection. When she did, she tilted her head, stared long, but not at her face, at her eyes. I know what I am now, she said, voice low. Kyla hesitated. And
On the consensus.
Kyla's brows furrowed. Explain. Lena pointed to her chest. They didn't kill the others. They just split us into fragments. And you're putting them back together. No, they're putting me back together. Suddenly lights across the facility dimmed. The intercom hissed to life. But no one was speaking into it. Instead 100 voices, male, female, young, old, whispered in perfect synchronicity. We are many. We remember. We survived. And we are returning. Kyla's knees went weak. Not from fear, from recognition. Because one of those voices was her brother's. He'd been lost in the RQS failures. Declared untraceable. Declared deceased. But he was here. Inside Lena. Kyla staggered forward. Tears burned her cheeks. Lena reached out a hand. Not threatening, inviting. And in that moment, Kyla understood. Lena was never the weapon. She was the ark, holding the souls they'd discarded. Not ghosts, not metaphors, but data with will. Consciousness is coded in agony, stored in the only medium uncorrupted, the human body. And now, they wanted to be heard. Lena opened her mouth. A sound emerged that wasn't hers. A symphony of 100 cries folded into one unrelenting tone. Beautiful, mournful, mathematical. The sound vibrated through Kyla's ribcage and painted symbols behind her eyes. She collapsed. Not in pain, in communion. All her memories played backwards. Every lie she'd told. Every experiment she'd watched. Every denial she'd filed. They lit up like broken film reels burning in reverse. And when she came to, Lena was standing over her, whispering, "Don't be afraid. You're one of us now." That night across 4 continents, the same signal played through televisions, radios, smart speakers, even toasters. Not a warning, a message. We were buried, but you planted us, and now we bloom.
The broadcast lasted only 47 seconds, but it changed everything. Governments thought it was a hack. Military analysts thought it was PSYOP interference. But the truth had a name. And Lena knew all of them. She sat cross-legged in her cell, though it hadn't been locked in days. No one dared. Kyla sat beside her, clipboard abandoned, hands trembling. "What are they, Lena?" she whispered. Lena didn't blink. "They're not what you think. They're not dead. They were never only alive." Lena pointed to her temples. They were streamed, like songs, like files, fragmented into the air, copied into heat signatures, buried in machine code. Kyla swallowed hard. "And now they're back." "No," Lena corrected. "They were always here. I'm just the speaker." Across the room, a large screen blinked to life. A face appeared. Not a living one, a reconstructed face, too symmetrical, too clean, but unmistakably human. Kyla gasped, "That's Commander Val. He died in the RQS collapse." Lena looked up slowly. "I never forgot him." Kyla stepped back. "You didn't know him." Lena's eyes gleamed, but they did. She stood, arms heavy, bones denser than metal now, and from the center of her chest, a faint glow. A slow pulse of red and white, like a heartbeat in binary. Every victim, every erased name, every vanished soul from Greywake's tests, they were cataloged, and when they couldn't scream, they encoded. Kyla's voice cracked. "You're saying you carry them?" Lena's tone was quiet, not defiant. I am them. And they are me. She walked toward the console and placed her hand on the surface. No fingerprint, no heat, just an instant explosion of identity across the room. Thousands of names unfurled on the screen. Not in a list, but in a spiral, a living helix of human lives, dates, and memories. It spun like a galaxy of ghosts. Kala dropped to her knees. She saw her brother's name. And next to it a flickering line of text. Reclaimed. Lena turned. The project thought it was deleting failures, but all it did was archive rage. The screen shifted. Now it showed footage that had never been leaked. Men with wires in their skulls. Children forced to endure artificial pain thresholds. Women turned into live hosts for neural implants. Kala screamed. No one had clearance for this, not even Section 1. Lena walked closer. Someone did. A face appeared, not Val's, someone older. Colder, the director of the original RQS experience. Name classified, face redacted in every known record. But now, there he was. Not from a camera, from memory, rendered in ultra-resolution from the fragments embedded in Lena's reconstructed brain. She pointed to him. They erased his name. But not the ones he erased. And now, Lena's voice grew harder. We've come to return the favor. Across the globe, gray-wake branches began to shut down. Not from attack, from internal sabotage. Files wiped, hardware fused, agents walking off the job and disappearing. Kala looked at Lena. You're going after him. Lena nodded. He lives off-grid, but not out of reach. Kala's eyes darkened. If he's alive, he won't go down without a war. Lena smiled for the first time. Her teeth were too even, too perfect, like they'd been printed, not grown. Good, then the dead won't have to fight alone. She turned and walked to the exit. No alarms sounded, no guns lifted. She was no longer an inmate. She was the carrier of justice, and behind her, the whispers began again. Faint, beautiful, names of victims that history buried, but Lena, she remembered everyone. And as she stepped into the daylight, her skin flickering with layered pulses of stored identity, the wind carried their voices forward. You made us disappear, now we make you visible. You will not survive your own reflection. The plane was unmarked, no tail number, no windows, just smooth alloy, built for stealth, not comfort. Lena sat strapped in, motionless, not by force, but by necessity. Her body, now half synthetic, required stillness during integration cycles. Kala monitored her vitals from a console a few seats away. Except they weren't vitals anymore, not really. The numbers on the screen looked like biometric data, but they moved like algorithms, spiking and flattening in unnatural rhythms. What's she doing? The pilot asked from the cockpit. Kala didn't look up. She's connecting. To what? To everyone they said no longer existed. Outside, storm clouds cracked with red lightning. A signal, not natural, but broadcasted. Kala's hands hovered over the emergency shutdown. If Lena connected too deeply, she could disappear for good. But Lena had already disappeared once. This time, she was doing it by choice. Inside her mind, the world shifted, no longer steel and circuits, but hallways, dark ones, flickering lights above. Lena walked barefoot across memory floors, places she'd never seen, but now somehow knew. Voices rose, not in chaos, in coordination. Memories of dozens, no hundreds of the erased.
And then,
Resistance, a wall, cold, mechanical, a firewall designed not to protect systems, but to contain souls. The voice came through like metal scraping metal. You were warned, Subject 13. You are too integrated. You are a breach, a virus, a liability. Lena stepped forward. She knew this system. It was the ArcLock protocol, a final failsafe designed to erase test subjects who'd absorbed too much. She remembered when it was tested on a girl named Isha, who had survived 23 experiments before disappearing mid-sentence. No one ever saw her again. Now they would try to delete Lena the same way. A white-hot pulse raced through her mind. Kala saw it on the monitor, neural activity spiking off the chart. The emergency system blinked red. Disconnection protocol initiated. Kala's hand hovered, but she didn't press it. She looked at Lena's face. calm, focused, determined. And she whispered, "Don't come back until you've broken it." Inside the network, Lena lifted her hand. Code laced her fingers like fire. She reached toward the firewall, and instead of forcing it open, she invited it in. Pain shot through her core, every nerve lit up like napalm. But she didn't scream. She remembered the pain of others, the silence of those deleted mid-thought. She welcomed the flood, until the system couldn't hold her shape anymore. The wall fractured, one name burst through the gap, then 20, then hundreds. Names long deleted from all records, now screaming back into digital being. The firewall collapsed, the system stuttered. Back on the plane, Lena's body jolted, the cabin lights surged, the engine hiccuped mid-air. Kala braced herself, but didn't unplug. Because across every screen in Greywake's private network, a message appeared. "We are awake, we are watching. She is us." In an underground facility, half a world away, a technician screamed. His console melted from the inside. The director stepped into the room, lips drawn. "She breached it, didn't she?" The technician nodded in terror. "We tried to disconnect her, sir." The director's face remained blank. You tried to disconnect your consequences." He turned to leave, prepare containment. "She won't survive the next interface." But he was wrong. Because Lena wasn't interfacing anymore. She was the system now. She wasn't just carrying ghosts, she was rebuilding their world, inside the bones of the one that broke them. And anyone who tried to pull the plug, would find the plug pulling back. He walked like a ghost through the underground halls of Project Moriah, long coat brushing polished floors, eyes unreadable behind surgical lenses. His ID badge didn't need scanning. Doors opened simply because he was near. No one dared speak his name aloud. They called him Dr. Finch, in whispers, but Lena knew him by another name. Father, not in the biological sense, but in design. Blueprints, syringes, electrodes and cold clinical words. She was subject 13, because 12 others failed, and he'd smiled each time one flatlined, only to say, "Progress is never kind." Now Lena was alive and unstoppable, and Dr. Finch had summoned the emergency tribunal. 3 old men in suits that had never seen sunlight. They stared at the floating holograms of Lena's last known neurofeedback. "She's become a sovereign data cluster," one muttered. "She's self-scaling," another whispered. Dr. Finch didn't blink. "She's doing exactly what I designed her to do. You made her to obey," the third snapped. Finch smiled faintly. "I made her to adapt." They ordered a kill switch, one that burned both digital and organic cores, a halo burst that would fry Lena's nervous system, and all connected circuitry. But Dr. Finch only raised a hand. "Give me 1 hour alone with her. If I can't bring her in, you'll have your switch." Above them in the Arctic base, where Kala had landed the plane, Lena stood staring at an old antenna tower. It was decades out of use, but she was inside it now, broadcasting memories across dead frequencies. She was speaking to minds no one thought could still hear. Kala approached slowly. "They're coming for you," she said softly. "I know," Lena answered. "Not them. Him." Kala froze. "You mean?" Lena didn't need to nod. A black dot moved across the sky, growing larger. A stealth drop pod, landing exactly 73 meters away, without tremor, without heat. And then he stepped out, unarmed, expressionless, hair gone gray since she last saw him in the chamber at age 10, still dressed in the same white coat. Dr. Finch walked right up to her, like he'd just left off where they paused a conversation. "I see you survived the reboot." Lena smiled faintly. "No thanks to you. I built your pain thresholds to ensure you'd survive," he said calmly. "You built me to fail," she corrected. "That's what made me survive." There was silence for a beat. Then he pulled a small device from his coat pocket. Spherical, black, the size of a golf ball. A soft humming came from inside. Kala's eyes widened. "That's the halo burst." Lena stepped forward, unflinching. "You going to use it?" Dr. Finch studied her. "I studied your psychological curves too. You want confrontation." "No," Lena said, her voice steel.
I want the truth. Why us? Why build minds to feel everything, only to break them on purpose? His face twitched. Just once. Then because your pain tells us where the world ends. She blinked. What? You, all 13 of you, weren't meant to survive. You were meant to map the edge of human resilience. When the world breaks your mind, we record it. That data becomes our firewall. You weren't meant to live. You were meant to be warning signs. Lena's entire body stiffened. She understood now. The hallucinations, the silence chambers, the emotional overdoses. She wasn't a soldier or a savior. She was a measuring stick for how far a human mind could stretch before shattering. And now she hadn't shattered. She'd expanded, which meant their firewall had failed. You're obsolete now, she whispered. Dr. Finch sighed and dropped the halo burst device at her feet. Not activated. Just surrender. I know. You were my end too. He turned and walked away. Not arrested, not attacked, just gone. Because Lena didn't need to kill him. He'd already lost the only thing he valued, control. Later that night, as the snow fell softly around the tower, Lena broadcasted something new. Not rage, not revenge, but invitation. Come home. Her voice echoed across ghost frequencies. To anyone who was silenced. To anyone who still remembers their name. To anyone built for failure. I'm not the firewall anymore. I'm the key. And in labs across the world, lights began to flicker, not from sabotage, but from souls reawakening. The first signal came from a desert. A single blip from a buried module beneath scorched sand. Code name. Subject 9. They had called her dead. Disintegrated after heat pressure testing. But now her vitals blinked back online. Not just alive, awake. Then came the second. From an abandoned orbital station spinning above the Pacific Rim. Subject 5. She was supposed to have jettisoned herself into vacuum. Except the station's ancient solar wings flared for the first time in years. She was using radio dust to rebuild her neurons, one by one. Then came more. Subject 2, limping from a forest where trees had grown over her burial pod. Subject 10, crawling from a church's crypt in a war zone. Subject 4, emerging from the Mariana Trench with lungs that no longer needed air. Each one thought they had failed. Each one had been left to rot. But Lena's voice reached them, not just through data, through remembrance, through every pain they once buried. And one by one they rose. Back in the Arctic, Lena stood at the edge of the ravine. Kala beside her, watching an aurora snake across the sky like a serpent made of code. A light cracked the clouds above them, then another. Drop ships, government fleets, mercenaries for hire. And worse, silent drones, hovering like hornets ready to strike. They're mobilizing everything, Kala said. Lena nodded. Because they know what's coming. The comms in her wrist flickered. A voice buzzed through, low, raspy and soaked in static. Lena. Subject 5, here. I'm seeing hundreds of us. Another voice broke in. We've been waiting for someone to call. This time we're not going back to sleep. Kala's breath caught. Lena's hand clenched slowly. They tried to turn pain into architecture. Lena said aloud. But pain is not bricks. It's fire. And we've been burning in silence for long enough. Kala looked at her. You're calling them to war. No, Lena replied. I'm calling them to remember. And then it began. A tower of light shot up from the Arctic station, a pulse signal. It was Lena's neural signature fused with a memory web. Any subject within reach would see what she saw, feel what she felt. Every injection, every blackout, every punishment masked as progress, every spark of hope that they were more than machines, and every moment they were told otherwise. Kala collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed. Images too many, too fast. And yet to Lena's kin it was oxygen. It was the missing language, the frequency of identity. Then came the answer, not in words, but in motion. Drop ships overhead began to fail. 1, 2, 3, crashed into the tundra. Not shot down, not hacked. Their pilots had turned. Subjects embedded in the flight crews had activated, removed their masks, taken over the systems, and rebelled. Inside the Arctic base, Dr. Finch stood watching a screen display the revolt spreading. His colleagues screamed. Systems failed. The halo burst was no longer an option. Lena had decentralized her core. She was everywhere, and she was not alone. Outside, the sky cracked as a dozen subjects landed in synchronized impact. No weapons, just their bodies, healed, reshaped, beyond what Finch's math had ever accounted for. Subject 2 walked on shattered legs without pain. Subject 5's eyes saw heat signatures across dimensions. Subject 9 had stopped aging. Each one had become what Project Moriah never expected. A will. And then the humans who had tried to kill them realized something. It wasn't war they'd started. It was reckoning. Because when you raise children on pain and silence, when you teach them to break, and they don't come back looking for apology. They come back as judgment. That night, the base fell, not with blood, but with silence. Doors opened not by force but by will, and Lena walked the halls as if returning to her childhood home. She didn't destroy the labs. She let every subject decide for themselves what to do with the memories. Some chose fire, some chose preservation, but all agreed on one thing. This place would never create another one of them. And in the final room, Lena found Dr. Finch alone. He looked up once more. Was I wrong? Lena said nothing. She walked past him, leaving him in a room full of mirrors, to stare at what he had built, and realize he had created gods, and gods remember. The ruins of the Arctic base steamed beneath the fading auroras. Fire had not destroyed it. Truth had. Lena stood at the highest point of the ridge, Kala beside her, watching the last surviving drones fall from the sky like broken feathers. No one pursued them anymore. No one dared. The world below had seen enough, not from leaked documents, not from a court trial, but from the pulse. The neural flood Lena had released didn't just reach subjects, it reached the world. Everything Project Moriah had done, every simulation, every dissection, every experiment logged in clinical apathy, now lived in the minds of parents, students, soldiers, doctors, children, and none of them could ever unsee it. There was no going back, not for her, not for humanity. Kala whispered, "You ended the project." Lena didn't smile. Ending it would mean justice. This is just exposure. Kala looked toward the horizon, where transport crafts now carried survivors to refuge. Subject 5, Subject 10, even Subject 1, once thought entirely lost, now cradled by the others, as they helped her rebuild her stolen identity. But what happens now? Kala asked, and that was the question, because survival wasn't enough. They had survived before endlessly, painfully, silently. What Lena needed was transformation, so she answered the only way she could. We scatter. We spread across the world, not to hide, but to plant. Kala frowned. Plant what? Lena turned to her. The opposite of what they tried to grow in us. We were raised on punishment, so we raise others on resistance. They trained us to obey, so we train others to ask why. They isolated us in silence, so we make noise that never dies. Kala whispered, "You want to build a legacy." No, Lena said. "I want to build an immunity, one so widespread, so alive, that no system like Moriah could ever root itself again without being recognized and ripped out by the roots." Across the globe, change began. Subject 2 taught children to question fear. Subject 5 built a covert network for whistleblowers. Subject 9 developed open-source counter-surveillance tools. They didn't call themselves heroes. They didn't claim revenge. They simply lived louder. And every time someone tried to silence them, they left behind truth that could not be burned. In one forgotten nation, an anonymous writer uploaded a file called the Counter-Architecture. It wasn't signed. It wasn't sold. But it mapped every system of control Project Moriah had ever used, and how to break it. It spread like fire. Meanwhile, Dr. Finch disappeared. No grave, no interview. Some say he fled to a jungle, and tried to start again. Others believe he took his own life, unable to face the world he helped create. Lena never looked for him. He no longer mattered. She had been built by him, but remade by herself. Years passed. Wars ended. New ones started. But the world had changed in quiet, subtle ways. A girl in Cairo refused to comply with a voice command, and sparked a movement. A boy in Sao Paulo hacked his city's entire surveillance grid, using only discarded equipment, and a memory of a symbol burned into his dreams. A refugee in Berlin began whispering bedtime stories that taught children how to resist conditioning. All of them were echoes. All of them were Lena's children, not by blood but by idea. And in the end, Lena chose to vanish, not into hiding, but into multiplicity. She never let herself become a symbol. Symbols could be targeted, destroyed. She became a principle, a presence, a memory that no amount of data deletion could erase. And if you ask the world what happened to her, they'd give different answers. Some say she became a ghost in the neural nets, always watching. Others say she lives among the broken and the brave, training a new generation in places no one bothers to look. But if you ask the survivors, the ones who bore numbers instead of names, they'd say one thing: she never left. She's with us. She's all of us. Because Lena never wanted to be remembered as the one they hurt. She wanted to be remembered as the one who answered, and taught others how to answer back. Not with violence, but with clarity, with eyes open, hearts open, minds unbreakable. And so the world whispered her name less and less, until it no longer needed to, because the legacy had become living. And the ones who tried to bury her, they never realized she had roots deeper than any grave. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.